Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And what does this have to do with our will? Hi, it's Deacon Mike, and welcome to A Cuppa with Mike, where you and I take a break, take a cup of the hot stuff, and reflect on the gospel of the day. This gospel, Luke's gospel, has Jesus warning us not to covet the wrong things, that we need to covet perhaps more than just material objects. And if we had to summarize the passage into one phrase from this gospel, it would be this: take heed and beware of all covetousness, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And the implication is that we have to have more in our life. Now, Luke tells us this in a wonderful way, and I really love Luke's writings. They're multi-layered, they're very cleverly written, and sometimes he writes like a detective. He drops clues in his passages, which almost act as keys so that we can open up the hidden layers. But before we get to that, let's look at what the passage says. It starts with a brother coming to Jesus and asking help to get a portion of his inheritance. And Jesus says, look, I don't control that. I don't judge that. And then Jesus warns this brother about coveting the wrong things, and then uses that quote that I've just used. And then Jesus follows up with a parable of a farmer who has such a bumper crop that he can't fit his crop into his existing barns, so he builds new ones. And when that is all finished and all his crop is stored, he sits back, relaxes, and realizes he has food for the rest of his life. And so he says to himself, I can relax, eat and be merry. God then responds, fool. And just a little diversion, I wonder how many of us remember the A-Team, where one of the characters kept saying, fool, and I'm giving away my age here. But back to the story, fool, tonight you're going to die, and you're going to have to give back your soul. And what will happen to the things that you've built up? Who will get them? And then the implication is the people who get them are going to be like the brother fighting over the inheritance. And so Luke has a circular passage, very cleverly constructed. Now, what are those clues? The first one comes in the word used by the farmer when he realizes he has enough crops for the rest of his life. He doesn't just reflect this to himself. So Luke, or Jesus, doesn't say the farmer thinks to himself, wow, I have enough food to relax, eat and be merry. No, the farmer addresses himself formally, and he gives himself a name, his inner self a name, soul, with a capital S. In fact, this is a formal way of which this translation has it. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Now, the Greek word that is used here for soul is psyche. In English, we would say psyche. And it really reflects a person's inner being in the sense that it's used, so the very essence or core of a human being. And in a Christian context, can mean the result of what God has given us by way of Spirit. So it is the result of what we do with the Spirit being given to us. Now this person reflects to himself and says, we can relax. That word then is reflected in God's response to the person where he says fool. And let's listen to this transliterated word for word, because it's an unusual construct which we don't see or hear in the translation. And I've got the transliteration in front of me. He says, fool, this night your suchain, what you have made into your God-given inner being, they are demanding back from you. And the things which you have prepared, for whom will they be? So the first unusual thing is, they are demanding from you. It's a very unusual way of Luke saying your soul needs to come back to God, your inner being needs to go back to God. There's speculation as to why Luke used this form. The they could maybe refer to the fullness of God, It could refer to the counsel of God. Often it's used this way in the Old Testament. Just my own thoughts. Perhaps it's not only the vertical, talking about the relationship with the divine, but also the horizontal, that they might well include the people of God or the kingdom of God. And so God is saying to this person, that which I've given to you and what you have made it into is to be taken back tonight. And then what? What will become of the goods that you have made? Of what use are they going to be? And of what use and goodness is the inner life of you become? And I think that's a very strong message to us today, where we need to think of what are we doing with our inner self? How are we becoming the person that the Father has called us to be? What way are we making a difference in God's kingdom? To follow Jesus' example, are we feeding the poor, clothing the naked, metaphorically giving sight to the blind, freeing captives? And when you and I do shuffle off this mortal coil, what difference will our whole life have made? Will it have been a ripple through God's kingdom that uplifts that kingdom? Or do we leave God's kingdom behind the same way as when we entered this world? So this week, it might be a good idea to look at our eternal will. Look at what the legacy is today that we would leave behind. And if we find it lacking, maybe we take this week to ponder what we can change so that we can make a difference into God's kingdom. I hope you've enjoyed this week's reflection. If you have enjoyed it and you're watching on Facebook, please can I ask you just to like the video and perhaps share it with your friends. And if you're watching on YouTube, I ask you to join my channel, A Cup with Mike. And until next week, until we meet again with a cup of the hot stuff, remember, let's build our legacy and maybe spoil ourselves this week. Cheers.